Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast, Padcast. I'm joined today and basically every other week and every other odd week with my main man here, the big Jason JY, the big Jason Johnston Yellen. Jason, 3 names, 4 names, 2 names, however names you want to give him, from Virginia. Well, not from Virginia, but living in the beautiful state of Euphoria of Virginia. How are you?
Thank you. I don't have his email in front of me, but James Foster, after the mailbag episode, wrote in and said essentially, "Why did you spend any time reading my nonsense?" Because it's good. I like it a lot. It was a warm up. It was stretching the old brain muscle.
But I would argue that there's a horde of listeners who would have the same question to you as James. Like, why did you endeavor to hurt people's brains in our mailbag episode by reading the most painful email that could ever have been delivered to us, Jason?
Because we were just like stretching before a marathon, or drinking water on the day you're going to go for a world record on pizza consumption. It's just what you do. You have to put in the hard work to get to the good work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you and I have put in some easy work, I would say. Over these past 5, now entering into 6 years, I think we've done a good job, hopefully a good job, of interviewing people. Yeah, what if it wasn't a good job? What if it's just been shit this entire time, Jason?
What if we don't really get 50,000 streams and downloads a month?
They're just bots.
An episode. I don't even look at the numbers. Yeah. They're all bots, yeah.
Bleep blorp, this is a great episode. So hopefully we've done a decent job interviewing people around the world, mostly in Scotland, some in the US, some in Australia, a bit in India, around traditional whiskey production or traditional rum production or traditional sherry production in that one odd case with our friend Mario.
Can I pause you right here? Can we put a pin in this right here?
Yeah. I mean, where's the pin going to go?
Right here.
How?
Ouchie.
How?
Have you seen Free Guy? Ryan Reynolds.
Do you know, I saw 85% of it and loved 84% of it. And then I'm sure there was a joke that just fell flat, and it was kind of Deadpool without Deadpool, but then I had to like up and leave, and I never got back to it. So you were watching it in your home.
In my home. Watching it in a cinema and got up and left it.
I did not watch it in the cinema. No, it was home.
Forgot to go get groceries.
Yeah. Why do you ask?
So as you know, and as I've talked about many times on the podcast, we have Saturday night movie night in our house, and we make pizza. I did make a veggie haggis pizza with the sharp cheddar. Rather delicious.
Oh, quickly.
So let's put a pin in that. Quickly.
Is that a sharp cheddar and moots combination, or just straight up sharp cheddar?
What's moots?
Mozzarella.
Oh, mott's. Mott's
No,
for
moots.
us
Moots.
overseas. Okay. No mott's in sight. I actually don't tend to use mott's on my pizzas.
So mott's is the applesauce. That's very different.
It is the applesauce. You are correct on that one.
I'm glad you don't use applesauce on your pizza, because that would be disgusting.
I save that for my latkes. Just straight up sharp cheddar, 3-year aged sharp cheddar. On just a very light red base. Don't want to go too crazy with the red base. Just a light red base.
Okay.
Then with the crumbled veggie haggis over that. Then some red onion that's what I've got in the house.
Okay.
White onion, if that's what I've got in the house.
Okay.
And then the sharp cheddar over that, boom, into the hot grill. And 4 minutes later, magic has happened.
And with the onions, are you cooking them before, or are you letting the oven do the work?
Just let the grill take charge of that. Now, there are other pizzas that I make that does rely on caramelized onions.
Yeah,
but
that was
this is
my
not.
question. Okay.
Yeah, this is not one of them. This is just a nice, fresh bite of a raw. And it's really just kind of warmed through at that point. It certainly hasn't caramelized. Started to soften.
Oh, but it's
a little
softened.
bit.
It's softened a bit. Okay.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
All right. So
real tasty.
yeah, free guy.
So in that world, we had Free Guy as the movie of choice. And I have to say, it is such a delightful conceit that a playable character within a video game would take on this life of his own. And I thought that was well worth exploring. And to be honest, it made me think of the Truman Show. Right, and Tamara and I looked at each other several times during the playing of the movie and kind of gave a Truman Show wink to one another.
100%. Yeah,
Right. Which actually had me thinking, have you seen Ed TV? Which I think came out around the same time as Truman Show.
Yeah, I did see that. And I remember approaching the viewing of that the same way one would approach the listening of Coldplay back when Coldplay first became popular. They felt like Radiohead light, and I feel as if Ed TV was kind of Radiohead light, but still enjoyable overall.
Never seen Ed TV.
All right.
Yeah, just never really landed in front of me.
Okay.
Truman Show, on the other hand, I have seen lots of times.
Fantastic movie. Yep.
And so obviously on one level you've got the self-awareness, the rising self-awareness of the character Guy and Free Guy, the Truman and the Truman Show, and it's that kind of coming to terms. But I thought what was interesting about Free Guy was the way it was incorporating modern technology to tell an established story. And the way current technology, and obviously our love of video games and how many of us have, I think the kids call it a video game player in the house. And it made me...
It's called a console, Jason. A video game player?
That doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound. I think video game player is what we have.
Right,
you had a record player, right?
Yeah.
You had a CD player. Yeah. This is just a video game player.
Yeah, questions at onenationunderwhskey.com if you want to correct Jason here, because it is a console. And then there are people...
You didn't have a radio player?
Listen, you've got two things. You've got a computer where you're going to do keyboard and mouse, and some crazy people like that way of playing, or you've got consoles that have a control paddle, which is in my opinion, the more natural way to connect to a video game. But it's not a fucking, what did you call it?
I think you're talking a computer game player and a video game player. Those are two remarkably different things.
Do you do that in your office room? Like when you play this?
Coming to you live from my office room right now. So, but then in thinking, looking at Truman Show, right, and the ubiquity of cameras, and thinking as we had camcorders in our homes, and camcorders gave way to our phones having cameras on them, and now here we are inside video games. And so I liked that evolving technology from one into the other. And so I think quite clearly all of that had me thinking about this week's interview. And so I'm going to circle back and allow you to unpin where I pinned you on your build-up.
Look at that. You're always looking for ways to be the master of segues or just comparative thought. I like that. I like that. Well
Transitions, introductions. Still reeling from being called nefarious in the last intro. But that's by the by. That's neither here nor there. That's whiskey under the bridge, as they say.
I like that. Whiskey under the bridge. So back to my previous point of always trying to deliver to people what we all know as that traditional production of whiskey, and everybody's own processes towards that, whether it is the distiller or the blender or the bottler or what have you, right? And now, having said that, and we mentioned it in today's episode, our second ever episode was with Brian Davis of Lost Spirits, who produced early on. He produced whiskey with unusual sources of peat. He would ferment a wash. He would distill it in a still that sat outside that was shaped like a massive dragon. And that was in Monterey, California. And then he moved down to L.A., and he had his his whiskey/rum lab where he would produce a spirit, and he would just include bits and bobs of oak that he would find around into this accelerator that would accelerate the maturation. And so, it's kind of interesting that we've always been the champion of tradition. Meanwhile, our second episode was the antithesis of tradition. And we brought that up in today's episode with both Stu and Martin at Bespoken. And people will hear it early on because Stu does a very good job where he takes this word of accelerated maturation and he says, this isn't accelerated maturation, it is craft maturation. And some people might say, well, you're just trying to fancy up this process. But as you go on and you start listening to the way Martin talks about collecting the data, and they're not, what I really liked about this, and people will hear it, they're not just accelerating the maturation of a product to get a product out to market as quickly as possible. That is a result of the process. But they're really trying to pinpoint flavor through this process, and they can change up the procedures. And so I really like their approach. Their approach, in a way, is almost more traditional when it comes to the accelerated maturation, in that a traditional producer would produce a distillate, and he or she would put that spirit into a bourbon barrel, into a sherry cask, into a Madeira cask, and then marry at the end. They'd pinpoint flavors through casks to come up with a product, and rather they're doing it differently, albeit with the hopes of that same result, just via a different process. And I really enjoyed that clarification through the conversation we had with these guys.
Well, and I think there's a couple of aspects in play here, and I think the juxtaposition of this episode with our first episode of season 6 is going to be absolutely tremendous, and not just because of the conversation we were having with John Campbell and how John Campbell talked us through the traditional Scottish exercise, for want of a better term, but also the anonymous letter that we read from our industry friend, where it's that sense of how much of this process are you allowed to touch?
Yeah.
And in that letter, that missive, that email that we covered, I thought the point was made beautifully that you can work your mash, you can work your wash, you can work your stills, but when it goes into cask, leave it alone.
Yeah.
Just let it do its job.
Yeah.
Now with Stu and Martin at Bespoken, there's this sense of a process that is always hands-on. It's the creation of a product from the very first steps.
Yeah. Yep.
And one of the things that I brought up in the interview was, and again, I reference the listeners of this podcast. We want to get geeky. We want to get nerdy. We want to learn as much as we possibly can about the science of the yeast and the science of the still and the cut points and how does one condense and what does that bring to the party. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we also want to know how wood breaks down. And that was part of Brian's research back in the day as well. And yet there's a part of us that is still hesitant to give wholeheartedly to technology, to non-traditional practices. And that's, you know, on one hand, the reason I bring up Truman and Free Guy is there is a natural evolution of technology that happens around us day in and day out. If we don't think the so-called traditional whiskey industry is up to speed with the latest breakthroughs in technology in their industry, we are misleading ourselves, right? They most definitely are up to date.
Yeah.
On the face of it, however, we still get to tell stories, make those presentations of farm distilleries like John and David with Locklee over there, right? And it's a connection to the land and how close is the barley being farmed to the distillery? How little is it traveling to come into the process? And my absolute takeaway, and I've used it in multiple interviews since this one, is what Stu said about there are more consumers out there than we can wrap our heads around.
Yep.
And I thought that was so telling. And so I'm very pleased that we're presenting Stu and Martin from Bespoken today. And they're able to tell their story. And they're able to present their side of this vast industry of ours.
Yeah. I want us all to go into this interview with an open mind. And that, I know I tried to do that as best I could, go into it with an open mind. And, you know, you at one point had talked about, you know, being a proud Scot, you know, and doing things with tradition and so on and so forth. But, you know, the fact of the matter is we tasted some of their whiskeys through the process of the conversation and beforehand. And what they're making is tasty whiskey. There's no doubt about it. And so I hope people go into this with an open mind, be willing to hear them out. What they're trying to do is not necessarily a replacement to what has been long established over these many hundreds of years. Rather, it's, you know, back to what Chris Udy often says, right? It's just another color in the palette. It's additional flavors to the bouquet of flowers that whiskey offers up, and it's not going to replace tradition. It's going to be a bolt on to what we know as whiskey production writ large.
And on top of that, it's purposeful.
Yeah.
And it's that sense from the anonymous email in episode 1 that two people here have a vision for something they want to produce. And that might look radically different from what many of us know as tradition, but it doesn't make it any less worthy.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no arguing with the level of knowledge Martin has built up in his lab. Right? As a scientist, he knows this inside out and back to front. And so the production becomes incredibly purposeful. And I think that's worth bearing in mind.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Let's hand it over to Martin, Stu, me, and you. Martin, Stu, thank you both so much for joining us on One Nation Under Whiskey. We're really happy to have you. The way that I found out about Bespoken, it was actually through a live event. I was at the Whiskeys of the World in San Jose, and I was working the Impex tables. So our import company is located out of San Francisco, and so we had just a row of tables there, and I was working the tables, and our national / single cask, private single cask guy, Elijah Ammon, came to me and he said, "Do you have a second?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "Do you want to step away from the table?" The answer is always yes. If someone asks you, "Do you want to step away from the table?" you say yes. So I said yes. So he brings me over to the Bespoken table, and he said, "I don't want to say anything, but have you heard of Bespoken?" I said, "No, I haven't heard of Bespoken before." He said, "I'm not going to tell you anything. Just ask to taste their light whiskey." Now, both Jason and I are light whiskey fans and have been for a while. We started bottling light whiskey in 2013, 2014, and just fell in love with the spirit back then. Anyway, I got to tasting the light whiskey, and I said, "That's pretty damn good." And he said, now give the rye a go. And I said, "Okay, I'll give the rye a go." And I said, "This is similarly pretty damn good. I like this a lot." And then I got talking to your ambassador there. I want to say his name was Blake. And he started going into your process of how you produce your spirits. And I was surprised. What I'll tell you is the second interview we ever conducted was with Brian Davis, who's now in Las Vegas, but he was in California for a while, creating spirit, basically doing accelerated maturation, much like yourselves. And Blake started going on telling us about the process, and I found it quite interesting. And so with all of this setup, I wonder if you both can tell us a little bit about Bespoken spirits, and then I want to get into the process part of it, and also some philosophical things as well. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll hand it off. I'll let you guys fight over who wants to take this initial question, but let's talk about the start of Bespoken.
Stu, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to, whoever touches the nose first, I guess, gets to go first. Let me just start by just kind of clarifying and contrasting something with what you just said. Okay. Because, obviously there are companies like the company you mentioned that came before us that focused on accelerated maturation. Mm-hmm. And I want to just clarify that accelerated maturation isn't actually what we do. What we do is craft maturation, which happens to be fast, and we'll come back to that in a second. But the reason for it is that what we're trying to do is control the maturation process to get a precise result out of it. So to be able to tailor the process to get the aroma, color, and taste profile that we or you or our client wants. And it's that we set out to do and built the company and the technology around. And there's three we call it craft maturation. Okay. And there's three main benefits to it. One of it is the time frame, the very fast learning cycles, which means we can try lots of stuff and learn from it very quickly to kind of hone in on what works and what doesn't work and what people love and what people don't love. Two, the precision control that lets us really design for a target result and make something that people will love, and different things for different people because different people have different loves. And last but certainly not least, sustainability. Our process uses on the order of 97% less wood, 99% less energy, and at least 20% less water than traditional methods, largely because we have no angel share. And so it's about control, it's craft maturation, it's taking spirit, craft, and creativity to new heights. It's not about acceleration, although acceleration is an important part that makes it so powerful.
Okay. That definitely does clear it up and is a different story than what Brian Davis is or was doing. I know he moved his facilities to Las Vegas. I don't know what he's doing now. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thank you for that.
Sure. Now, in terms of kind of the whiskey spark, Martin and I are both, I describe us as recovering Silicon Valley engineers. after spending our careers at a variety of different startups, working on technologies and understanding, launching new businesses and process control and data science and material science and all these things, we reached a point where we thought, wouldn't it be fun to apply everything we've learned and all of our experiences to something we're a little bit more passionate about than, maybe the next iPhone app or something like that. And Martin and I had first gotten to know each other about 15 years ago. We worked at a sustainably oriented company, a fuel cell company called Bloom Energy. And it was about 4 years ago that Martin came to me with really the idea behind Bespoken. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but the way he described it to me was he was in a wine and whiskey club. And he was, getting frustrated in that club that, to get anything great, he either had to spend a lot of money or buy something years in advance. And as the material scientist in that club, people kept expecting him to explain why that was. Why was a 15-year-old Scotch worth so much more than a 10-year-old Scotch, as an example? And he couldn't scientifically explain it. So he started reading and tinkering and inventing, and ultimately he invented the technology behind Bespoken, which was about taking control of this maturation process for the reasons I said before. So let me stop there and really give Martin a chance to elaborate for you.
Cheers.
It was really about the learning cycles, right? Is something that as an engineer, right, if there's something you learn over 25 years is, right, if you want to make any progress, it's all about how fast you can learn, right? Mm-hmm. And it's even just such a simple concept, right? But the basic idea of trying to understand or figuring out what is really going on in maturation of spirits, right? I knew there's no way we're going to figure this out, right? If it takes us even a year or 5 years, not even talking about 5 years or 10 years, right? There's no way that you can run all these experiments and get all these learning cycles. That's why I call an industry like this, usually it's an experience-driven industry. Right, you do things because you have an experience. You don't really not really know why, but it was probably Paul who did it before you, right? And that's why we're using the same char and the same wood supplier. And it was all about really trying to figure out what is really going on in the maturation process. And for that, I knew that we needed to be faster than that. And there was a group, especially in Portugal, that was working on brandies, and then you mentioned Lost Spirits, right? The work that they have done, right? And that kind of told me, wow, right? If somebody thinks they can do this, in like the Portuguese group was doing it, they had like a 3-month learning cycle, right? I figured out if we pull together some smart people, maybe we can do it even faster. And then from those learning cycles, right, you can make it. We've done 10,000s of bourbons, right, by now, different bourbon recipes, right? And by doing that, you start to really learn and understand what is really going on, right? What are the critical things that is happening when you treat the wood, and then how it reacts with the spirit, and what kind of a starting spirit do you need to get to an end product. But it is such a complicated subject because you have so much chemistry going on, right? So that we also, a lot of what we do is data science, to kind of trying to make sense from the results that we are getting, because it's just so complex and there's so many variables, right? At least my human brain could never process all the data, right? So we are also at a good time in history where we have the computer power available, right? That with those, every experiment that we are making is probably generating somewhere around 200-300 data points, right? And then we use artificial intelligence, etc., right, to try to make sense with all the different process parameters that we have. How does that impact the chemical fingerprint and therefore also the taste, aroma, and the color of the spirit? I probably went too much into detail, but sorry.
No, not in the slightest, Martin. No, you'll really enjoy our listenership. They are geeky and nerdy and really want to delve in. And so one of my questions for you was, you came to this with some frustration about getting at the heart of maturation. In conducting the science, what did you discover about maturation? What is happening in there over these 10s and 15s of years, as Stu was mentioning a moment ago?
Sort of it, we probably won't even tell people what is happening, right? Because it's amazing how much experience and how much myths are out there, right? And people talk about how important the angel share is for a certain thing, right? It makes it all smooth, etc. And then you can actually start making those experiments, right? And to see how does this really impact, right? The profile of the spirit. But a lot, and I wouldn't say that people didn't know this before we did it, right? So a lot has to do with the wood treatment. Right. And this was one of the first challenges I went into. I said, okay, so people are using a char number 3, right? So I reached out to a couple of different coopers, right? And I said, yeah, I would like to have char number 3, right? So I get the wood, right? And all the barrels, and I look at them and, oh my God, they all look different. Right, and I said, okay, so let's try a toast, right? So I purchased medium toast, right? Didn't know what to start with, so I said, let's do medium, right? And I get three different woods for 3 different toasted wood, and they look all different. I'm like, man, and if there's anything that I learned as a material scientist, right, since out of college, was that if anything looks different, right, as a material, there's a good chance it's going to be different, right? So the first thing was, oh my God, right, the wood treatment. What is a medium toast? Right, everybody does it differently, and that was one of the first things we said. Okay, if we really want to understand what is happening, we need to be able to control the starting materials, right, the raw materials, and once I started talking to people from the industry, you get this back. Oh, it's a natural element, right? You can't really control it, and that's one reason why we use something that we call a microstave, which is about the size of my pinky, right? And we control the wood on that level. Controlling means we characterize it, we measure physical and chemical properties of the wood down to that level, so that we can kind of make sure that every time we use a certain wood as a starting material, that it is constantly the same. To Stu's point, right? Being able to control the process to make sure that not, to use an analogy to the barrels, right, that not every barrel is different, right, from another barrel, right, which now a lot of people, including you guys, make single cast barrels, right, because it's different from the other, and it's so much better, but not sure anybody really knows. So we knew that if we want to understand what is happening, we need to be able to control the starting materials. So that's sort of obvious from a process engineering point, but that was super challenging, and that's why we do all the wood treatments in-house, right? And the way we control, whether it's the toasting, whether it's the charring, we use different methods, and because it's also on a different scale, we can do things that are just really, really hard to do with the barrel from a control point of view.
And the neat thing is, when you look at all the variables, the different source spirits we can start with, the different mixes and combinations and ratios of these microstaves that we can handcraft and blend together for our recipe, and then the environmentals, temperature, pressure, agitation rate, atmosphere, humidity, etc. We've got close to 20 billion different recipes that we can create. Yeah. And that's what allows us to hone in on very precise results and give the customers what they want.
That's a big number.
It's a very big number.
Ooh, too much for my brain. That's why we need the data science.
And it's amazing what it lets us do. I'll show you an example. I know we're not going to taste these products, but I'm going to hold up two of our products. This is what we call our original batch, which is a whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash, and this is what we call our special batch, which is also a whiskey distilled from a bourbon mash. This one is a bourbon, right? Vanilla, caramel. You can see dark color, right? Yeah. This one is a Japanese-style whiskey. It's light, it's floral, it's aromatic. These two products could not be any more different on the spectrum of aroma, color, and taste. They're both multiple award winners in prestigious competitions, by the way. But what makes it really exciting is that both of these products started out as exactly the same white spirit. Yeah. So the only difference between this bourbon, this award-winning bourbon, and this award-winning Japanese-style whiskey is a different recipe, meaning that combination of wood and wood treatment and environmental controls, and then 3 days in our machine, plus obviously a lot of experiments to hone in on what was the recipe that really would win the day.
So is the grain the same in both, and just the wood treatments is wow? That's so I'm actually sipping on your special batch right
you
now.
have it? Oh, nice.
Yes, and I had a question about barrels. I wanted to get back to, and hopefully I'll remember to do that. But I wanted to make a comment about something I found that's been uniform through the three that I've tasted so far, which is your light whiskey, your rye, and now your special batch. Actually, I did have a sip of the bourbon as well. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I found is, in contrast to a traditionally aged product, this has a rounder sense of flavor. And by that I mean spirits like cognac or even, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mendocino spirits in California. All of these are distilling spirit through an alembic still. And that alembic still distillate has this roundness, this softness to the overall delivery of flavor, where something that's been distilled through, say, traditional copper pot or a continuous column still has more of a vibrant flavor structure that kind of goes like this. This is soft and round and approachable. And I'm curious where you think that's coming from, Martin, in the thousands of data points you've collected. Is that something you've targeted and that's the style that you're going for? Or is it an evolution? I'm enjoying how it's tasting. I'm just curious where it's coming from.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure anybody has phrased it the way that you were saying. But by the way, all these spirits were originally column distilled, right? Okay. And then due to the what we call our activator, right, where we combine the wood together with the spirit, right, is where we apply heat, we can apply pressure and things like this, right? And there we're kind of removing or eliminating some of the things that might contribute to what you call not as a round flavor, right, or profile. It's an interesting one because that one is, from a data point of view, it's really, really hard to capture that in to measure it, right? And this is one of the challenges that we are having also with to combine the things that we can measure. And that's a continuous development that we are doing from GCMS analyses, right, to LCMS analyses, where you try to capture what we feel in the mouth versus what we actually smell, and then to correlate that with, for instance, with the experience that you are having, right? And that one is really, really hard at this point, right, to subsidize with the analytical methods that we're having. But the beauty is, by getting more and more data, right, and then getting more and more tasting data, right, it will enable us to figure out, what is it, right, that Joshua says it makes it so rounder, the spirit versus a different spirit. And there's still so much data for us to analyze, and also we analyze also competitor spirits, right, all the time. Whenever I go to a bar, I take 2 mils of it. I hope that's legal. I take it home. I haven't thought about that, whether I should mention this here on the call, but anyway, if I don't want to buy the whole bottle, right, then and we look at that chemically, right, from a chemical fingerprint, and then try to see where the differences are when customers give us a target, right? Same thing. But I'm glad you like all those spirits, and that you kind of felt like they actually also very excited about the special batch. And I believe you also had the straight bourbon, right? The gray label.
Yeah, we've got, let me see, we've got the light whiskey, the special batch whiskey, the straight bourbon, the original batch whiskey,
you guys
and
got
then
a
your
lot.
rye whiskey.
All right.
Got everything but the rum.
Everything but the rum? Oh, okay.
And the original and the special batch is what Stu described, right? They started both from MGP's high rye mash bill, right? And they're just, like Stu said, they couldn't be any different. I don't know if you agree.
For sure, I definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a connection, but but I don't know if I feel the connection just because I was told where the mash bill comes from, and therefore, the witness has therefore been led. That part I don't know.
Yeah.
Jason, I had another question, but I didn't want to step on your toes here.
I heard you said you had a question about barrels, and I had a question about barrels. So I want to see if your question is my question.
Okay, and this is understanding that you're not using barrels, right? You're using this micro stave. But while you were doing this research and finding, okay, their number 3 toast is different from their number 3 toast or char, and their medium toast is different from their medium toast, did you find that it was due to subjectivity from the cooper, or simply that it was something that they couldn't fully control? Now, I heard you say that they couldn't necessarily control the consistency, but I wonder if Speyside Cooperage's number 3 char is different from Kelvin Cooperage's number 3 char, is different from Independent Stave's number 3 char. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it might be just that these are their recipes, right? What they, based on the different methods they're also using, right? Depending on how they char, whether they do it with an open flame, right? Or whether they use propane gas, right, to do it. But for us, because for us it was super important to get a consistency, right? And we originally we didn't want to be in the business of actually making wood ourselves or treating wood ourselves. So we thought we can source it, but we also knew that a single source is going to be a challenge. So that's why we went to different sources. And I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to blame anybody that one barrel is going to be different from another, but there are some studies, especially people from the wine industry. They have looked a lot, and there's a paper from UC Davis that kind of looks at the barrel from the top to the bottom and looks at the chemical composition. There was actually, I believe it was a medium toasted barrel, and it's just everywhere different, right? Because the heat exposure on the top was different than in the center as well as on the bottom. And so the variations are there, but I'm sure that these cooperage, if they do it all every time the same time, right, they will probably get the same treatment if the grain size, if the grain orientation, right, and things like this, right, are constantly the same. But we just did not see a way on how to do this on the barrel size to be really able to control it to the level that we saw we needed to control it to get a consistent product that we need. Otherwise, we're not able, right, to customize the aroma, color, and taste. If every time we use it, it's different.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, with my question is slightly different. In our last episode, and I love the echoes that we have in this episode with our previous one with John and Ferguson.
Yeah, David Ferguson. Yeah.
David, there you go, from Lochlee, where they were talking about inconsistencies, and they were talking about how you make that work given traditional Scottish techniques. And one of the things we'd asked them was, we've got this little bit of a shortcut now on what percentage of flavour comes from a barrel, slash in this instance comes from the wood, right? And you had mentioned earlier, Martin, about some of those myths that get perpetuated without too much science happening behind them. And so I'm just kind of curious, we've started hearing this number, 70% of a whiskey's flavour comes from the barrel, and you're already chuckling at that, right? Like I know that we need sometimes shortcuts for the consumer to get their mind where we need to get their mind. But do you have any sense of 70 making sense? Is it too variable? When you're then working on your recipes and techniques with your microstave, and maybe you don't want to reveal, but what contribution is that making to the flavour, given that Stu just showed us Clear New Make Spirit with two remarkably different products that come from that?
Sure. Yeah.
So it really depends on what flavors you're looking for, right? In a spirit, right? I think it's sort of obvious that caramel, right, or butterscotch, right? So a lot of these vanilla, a lot of the aldehydes, right? They're very, very clearly coming from the wood, right? So there's close to zero of them in the starting spirit, right? And then there's another group that people called esters, right? That are familiar, that are responsible for a lot of the things that people like, whether that's peach, whether that's banana, right? Isoamyl alcohol is responsible for that. That actually you cannot get it out of the wood, right? That has to be in your starting spirit. So very often, if a customer comes to us and they're looking for a specific profile, we first need to look at the starting spirit, which roughly half of the time is fresh of the distill, fresh of the still. And in the other 50%, people actually come to us with something that is 3 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. I think the oldest was a 9-year-old whiskey, where they were looking to add a specific characteristic to the spirit, right? And then we have to look at that, right? How is it chemically composed, right? And can we actually achieve that end result if we don't have the starting material in the spirit? So, but to your point, and this is kind of what drove us to focus on the maturation, right? That people said, "Oh my God, it's 70." Somebody said 80, and then somebody else said 90%. Right? And we said, "So how is it possible that there is so?" Because a lot of science went. I was born in Czech Republic, actually in Pilsen, right? So I brew my own beer. Right, and a lot of science has gone into fermentation. Right, people don't use it. At least the brewers, right? They don't use just one yeast, right? Because they know, oh my God, right? The yeast is so important, and they probably have also a shorter learning cycle, so they can do that. Right, and then and of course a lot of science, even though some of those stills might still look the same as they used to be, but there's a lot of science went into how to optimize the stills, right? How to perfectly engineer them, right? To be able to do good cuts and everything, and control what's coming out and throughput. But then on the maturation side, it was the interesting part of really, and this was what, right? Really 60 or 80, 90% is coming from the maturation part, right? Why has nobody focused on trying to understand, improve that process? And that actually sparked the whole idea that, a lot. But it really depends, to your question. It really depends what kind of the color, of course, right? 100% from the from the barrel, right? And then once you talk about the aromas, right, or the taste, right, or the mouthfeel, then you're kind of starting to see combinations. But there's still a group of them. But even the ones, the esterification that I mentioned, right, is also super interesting. And we're actually working with universities. We're doing a lot of science to really understand how are they really formed, right? Because so the starting material needs to be there, but we are learning things that we are surprised that nobody has described before, right? That actually help us to do these things within a couple of days, rather than what is typical that it takes years. But, and I don't know if we mentioned this, so the spirits that you were drinking, they're somewhere around 3 to 5 days it takes us to make those spirits.
Absolutely wild.
Jason holds up dark liquid off camera.
Martin and Stu, you both mentioned this at some point during the conversation, where you've got customers that come to you and say, I would like you to help create a spirit for us. And what I found intriguing was, initially I assumed that you would say, okay, here's a mash bill we can work with, and then we'll work with our microstaves and our machinery, and we'll create this product for you. But you'd said someone would come to you with aged spirit to then have you modify the aged spirit. And so I guess we're back into the geeky part of it. but there is a customer element to it as well, because you're creating spirits for clients. So I do want to touch on that. Yeah. But I wonder if there are differences between creating a product from new make to final product 3 days later, to creating or modifying a product that starts as a 9-year-old to 3 days later something else. Can you talk to that a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And again, just to reiterate what you were just saying, you're right. Our as a company, our platform, this technology and process that we've developed really allows us to support 2 businesses.
Yeah.
Right. One of our businesses is selling Bespoken branded products,
yep.
of which you're tasting, and the second business is the business where we provide technology and services behind the scenes to other players in the industry, distillers, rectifiers, retailers, celebrities, et cetera, who want to either create something completely different, mm-hmm. bridge the time and economics challenges or supply chain challenges of new make versus older stuff, or fix something that didn't come out the way they wanted when they went through the traditional methods and nature wasn't kind to them. And so, we support both of those businesses, and they're both really exciting businesses to be in.
Okay, so let's use a specific problem, and if I'm overstepping here, please let me know. If there's stuff you don't want to talk about, please let me know. But let's say you have a client that comes to you with a product, a bourbon, and it's reached the point where it's not just oaky, it's astringent. And they've got a lot of that, and they need it turned around so it's not like you're drinking burnt popsicle sticks. Can you fix Can you fix anything? Can you fix something like that?
Interesting. Nobody's ever come to us with something where they had something overaged.
Yeah,
right, which is probably what you're talking about. Right?
Yeah.
Usually, and maybe it's because you're selling that for a lot of money these days, and some people don't even will ever open those bottles to check how it actually tastes because it's so valuable. But we've not had so far. I don't recall a single customer who came to us, like, let's say, with a 18-year-old or whatever old bourbon, right, and who kind of wanted to fix it to taste like a 12-year-old. Right, that has not been a challenge that was posed to us. Usually, it's the other way around. They have a 3-year-old product and they wanted to taste it like a 5, 6, 7, 8. Even those numbers are so arbitrary, right? Because when people always ask me, "Can you make a 7-year-old bourbon for us?" What is that? Right? Can you define that? Because there's no such thing, right? Every 7-year-old bourbon tastes differently, right? We do have some, of course, some chemicals that we are looking for, so we can actually predict pretty well on how old the spirit is when we receive it. When it happens again and again, that people send us something, they tell us it's 9 years old, and we tell them, "No way, this is 9 years old. It looks more like a 3-year-old," and then they go back and they say, "Oh, you're right. We sent you the wrong sample." It's actually pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Yeah. But so usually they want us to. They usually want us to make it to be able to use something that is 2 years old or 3 years old, and be able to kind of elevate it to the level that people would more expect from an older spirit. And sometimes it's also very specific. Sometimes somebody, we want some leathery notes, right? Can you do that for us? Right. So sometimes I'm amazed how specific it is, and not everybody in our team has the palate, right, to even be able to describe what it is. So we work a lot with industry people out there, right, to quantify what is leathery, right? How can we even, and then to correlate it what we're actually measuring in the lab, then, right, to be able, like somebody says, "I want more vanilla," right? To me, when vanilla reaches like 60 ppm in the spirit, right, I think it's pretty high in vanilla. For somebody else, is gonna say, "Vanilla? What is there vanilla in there? I can't taste it," right? Because we're all so different, right? So that's part of the challenge that we're having, right? By being able to because we need to kind of connect the data, right, with the experience of the customer, the consumer. And so you have to, for each of our customers, consumer, you kind of have to readjust on what they are tasting,
And on the services side of the business, we've seen some pretty wild and diverse ranges of products from again, nature wasn't kind. This came out of a barrel at 5 years, fix it, give me the vanilla notes I was looking for or whatnot, to I wish I made more. I have a wildly successful product that I made 5 years ago. I sold out like that. Yeah. I don't want to wait another 5 years. Help me bridge that gap, right? To ready-to-drink cocktails, where the company may have a well-known spirit brand that they want to make ready-to-drink cocktails out of, but they don't want to use their premium aged stuff in the ready-to-drink cocktail, but they want it to taste like their premium aged stuff, right? And then, again, the most common scenario is really kind of a simple financial arbitrage, right? How do I get a product to market better, faster, cheaper, especially in today's day and age where there's supply constraints, where for a lot of rectifiers that want to get aged spirit right now, it's not there. They can't purchase it if they want to. So those are some of the scenarios that become. So we even saw a scenario where we did some work for a beer company that realized that with the pandemic they were having all this excess or expired beer that they had to pay people to take back and destroy. And why not distill it into a whiskey and work with us to turn it into a good whiskey as opposed to a beer bin, for lack of a better word. So lots of different scenarios. And again, this core process and technology really allows us to address a lot of very compelling value propositions for these customers.
Yeah, and due to the learning cycles, you don't like it? Okay, we'll be back next week, right, with another set of 20 samples. And you still don't like it? We'll be back next week, right? And then you hone it in. It was for me really, really mind blowing after all these years in high tech, right, where we had so long learning cycles, and we tried to do something and do 2% faster and 3% faster or 5% faster, and then to have a learning cycle that is like thousands of times faster, this just was a no-brainer for me to give it a try.
It is a crazy notion to have that many data points associated with something that's thought of as so traditional, and it's I'm kind of piggybacking on the question asked about the barrel, where we've got it, and I already said it about the listeners of this podcast, where they're uber geeky, they're nerdy, they want to get at the heart of the science that's going into their whiskey, and they're comfortable not knowing some of the processes. We brought up the cask maturation there. When you then start to talk about processes, clearly like the ones that we're talking about in today's episode, there's some hesitancy there with the, tradition either goes out the window or becomes so important that it puts the brakes on people. And so I'm curious, given that you're living this day in and day out and you're so wonderfully knowledgeable on the science of this, what do you think the consumer needs to hear? That consumer who wants to get nerdy and geeky, but also wants there to be tradition and multi-year maturation here. What's your response to that consumer, and how can you bring them into the fold? Because you clearly have. You seem like you're doing rather well. So you're clearly being successful. How are you doing it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jason. And obviously, at the end of the day, the taste is what matters most, right? And that we always, put it in your lips and tell us what you think. But the first thing to realize is there is no one consumer, right? The market is so massive, and there's so many consumers who are so open-minded or care about sustainability or don't want to drink what their daddy or their grandpa drank. That is just massive. There will always be some segment of the market that is a little bit more stuck in tradition, religious. That's not our core market, and we're not going to sell them on new religion. The only way we're going to get to them is by taste. But one of the things that I think is very important to highlight, and this is why right off the bat I clarified the distinction between what we do and those people that are all about accelerated aging, is that our process, our craft maturation, is very much about craft and creativity. And it's taking it to new heights. And it allows us to create whole new vectors for what you can do with craft and creativity that you couldn't do before. So it's just kind of a new wave of this. And it's incredibly traditional as well. in that we use all the same elements that go in traditional barrel aging, nothing addition, no additives, no chemicals. We've just reimagined the process, right? And that gives us the ability to do all of these, these really neat things with it. And so I always I tend to equate it to digital animation, right? Yes, it's not the old hand-drawn animation, but it's unlocked so much more that we can do with animation that, the industry and the everybody embraced it. And I think that's kind of the curve we're on. So whether it's akin to digital animation or electric cars or plant-based meats, I think that, it's one of those markets that you grow in over time. You don't have to address everybody right off the bat. Some people will never come around, but most people are really open and receptive to the creativity, to the story, to the sustainability, and most importantly, to the quality of what we've been able to produce.
Yeah, I think that's a cracking response, Stu, and I really wanted to give you that opportunity to say that out loud, because I'm speaking for myself here, obviously as a proud Scotsman, but I'm sitting here and I'm digging the science, as is Joshua. We're just digging the science. And then we get to a 3 to 5 day turnaround, and I go, whoa, now wait a second. Now for us in Scotland, we've been doing it like this for so long, And so I love the fact that you get to say, it's taste, it's flavor. Put it in your mouth. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. We all move on. Consumer's a big thing. And in addition to that, I like the fact that you say there are multiple consumers here. They're not all old white-haired guys like you, Jason. And they're not all proud Scotsmen. They are willing to see it. And so I like the corollary to other industries. Because I was thinking earlier while Martin was talking, if this was about anything other than whiskey, I would be so gung-ho, like absolutely, yes, forward, yes. And it's whiskey, and I'm protective, and I'm traditional, and I'm hesitant. And so I really do, Stu. I really enjoyed what you said there. And I think you've spoken to the market very well. And yeah, shit, I'm going to put a Bespoken bottle on my shelf. I'm going to do it. Going to be a brave boy.
We will get the white-haired Scots eventually. It's just, we don't have to get them right away. We can give them time.
Key demographics, Stu. Key demographics.
That's right.
Yeah, really tight Scotsmen will not pay the bills. Like, that's not going to happen. Cheap as chips we are. And so I wanted to give you the floor. And so for the core range that we've got in front of us here, who are you seeing the consumer being there? What's that Bespoken drinker looking like?
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's one of the other benefits of our technology is not only can we go deep, we can go wide, right? We've created a portfolio of products, and part of the reason for that is we really do want to make whiskey and spirits more approachable to people, not just to the elite, experience, but to the curious, to the inquisitive, to the novices, to the underrepresented demographics, in terms of buyers. And we feel that by giving them a portfolio of different tastes and flavors and aromas, as opposed to one thing that you're supposed to like because the white-haired Scotsman likes it, is a good way to do that. So what's neat about our portfolio is we always say, I don't know which product is going to be your favorite, but I know that within my portfolio there's going to be one that you're going to like, whether you gravitate to the sweeter or the spicier or the neater or the heavier. There's something that we can offer there, and that's an important part of, I think, what makes Bespoken unique.
Mm-hmm. I had a question, and please, without giving away trade secrets, one of the things that intrigued me, and I just poured, where was it? Crap was it? Oh, here it is, the original batch whiskey. So I just poured that, and I'm tasting it. And my initial thought was, it's spicy, it's rich, it's got a big oaky backbone to it. It's got such a presence to it. And it reminded me, in a way, to some of the Elijah Craig 12-year-old, back when Elijah Craig held a 12-year-old age statement on it. Just that spiciness, that richness. And without giving away trade secrets, what's happening across a 3 to 5 day period maybe just from a science perspective, that is allowing that to happen in such a unique way. And I understand you've got secrets that you want to hold close to the vest. So I'm not looking for secrets. I'm looking for what you tell the consumer when they ask that question to you.
If I answer, it's probably going to be too geeky and too scientific.
Nothing's
So maybe
too geeky.
maybe Stu should answer too. But it starts again with the wood, right? The barrel was never really meant, right, to add any flavor, right? It was always meant to be for transportation, right, to get it around. And I hate barrels on one hand, right, because they're so clunky, they're so heavy. But when you want to move them, they're amazing, right? Because you can flip them over and you can move them, so it makes so much sense, right? When you use to transport them on ships, and a single person can just roll them wherever you want to have them, and then you can flip them back on after you did it a couple of times. So it's amazing, right? But they were never meant to be, right, the 80-90% contributor of the aroma, taste, and color, right, of the spirit. And so because we're using these microstaves, right, and the way we're treating them, and the way we can treat them, because they are that size and we can treat them from all kinds of different sides, the efficiency of the extraction of what is happening in the barrel, that just takes very, very long, right, because the spirit needs to sieve in. And then it also sees, if you have a charred barrel, right, there's only the so-called red layer, which has been impacted by the heat, which is only a couple of 100 microns. I have no idea what that in inches is, right? Very, very tiny, right? That was actually impacted by the heat treatment. So because we treat the wood, and we can treat the entire wood, and that's why we are so efficient on the wood, and we can use so much less wood, and therefore have to take down so much less trees, right? Is because we use the entire volume of the barrel, right? And then we optimize the process in a way that we can get everything out of the wood, right, that we need to get within actually the first 2/3 of the entire maturation process. And then it's about certain reactions that are taking place, right? We talked about esterification, right? And so we figured out a process, a way of to accelerate those. And a lot helps us with temperature. And people know this, right? Temperature, everybody knows, right? And in the rig house, top barrel is going to be so different from your bottom barrel, right? On extraction, but especially also on the chemical reactions that are happening. And these chemical reactions have the dependency is exponential, right? So you increase a little bit temperature, it actually has a huge impact. So that's why we operate our activator at elevated temperatures, where that helps us with the acceleration of those reactions to happen. What people think takes years, but it can happen within days.
Don't forget about the atmosphere, the ability to replicate the humidity of Texas, or of Kentucky, or the the salinity of Scottish air, or things like that, is also kind of an element that we could take control of. Martin gave you kind of the tech example. The dumbed down example I always like to give is: are you familiar with that ice cream Dippin' Dots?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like if you want to make a banana split out of Dippin' Dots, you take some chocolate dots and some vanilla dots and some banana dots, and you craft what you want the outcome to be. And that's kind of like what we're doing with these microstaves, right? Because each one's so small, each one brings only what we want to the equation, none of what we don't want. And when we're setting out to do a recipe, we're very selectively choosing these microstave mixtures. We might, for one recipe, use all American oak. For another recipe, we might mix some American oak with some French oak with some cherry. And then within the American oak, we might mix some Category 1 with some Category 2 with some Category 3, or use only Category 2, which replicates the middle of the stave as opposed to the top or the bottom. And it's this literal handcrafting process of creating these blends of the wood that is really the cornerstone of what we do. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times people say, well, your process is faster, it must be cheaper. Right? It must be easier, right? And the reality is it's harder, it's more work, it's more complex to take control of maturation. It happens to be faster, but it's actually so much more painstaking, handcrafted, artisanal work that we do to figure out these recipes. And then because we can learn from them, we could document what each recipe does, which makes future recipe design a little bit easier.
Well, and I think systems coalesce around traditions, and that's what ultimately brings down prices, right? The fact that you're in a non-traditional world is blazing a new trail that is going to involve new costs for you. It's a worthwhile point. I'm conscious of your time. I know we asked for an hour of it. If I could squeeze in one question here, and then we've got one question that we ask of everybody to wrap up, and then we'll be good. Is that okay for you, gentlemen?
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation. So, Mark Watt is a dear friend of ours in Campbelltown over in Scotland. And way back, this is now the start of our 6th season of the podcast. Way back in the very beginning of the 1st season, he posed a question that I think about literally every day. He said, if whiskey didn't contain alcohol, would anybody drink it? And so we spend so much time waxing lyrical about the flavours that are present in whiskey, and we go in search of those. But you also can't turn up your nose at the alcohol in it. And I do love the strengths of this core line sitting in front of me. The 45, the 47, and the 50s. Spot on. And so my question is given your expertise and given your knowledge, could we have a 0% alcohol whiskey? You're both smiling at me, just for the benefit of the listeners. You're both smiling at me. Could we have a 0% whiskey that delivered all the flavors that we all love?
You're looking for a dry January product, Jason? Is that what's going on here?
If they're taking on clients, if I get the right answer here. So, could it be a thing, gentlemen?
Very, very, very timely, right? That question, right? I just bought some zero alcohol products, and I was actually shocked that anybody would sell them, because there was I'm just going to call them, because I'm not mentioning who it is. I thought they were disgusting, had nothing to do with the whiskey, right? Nothing to do with it.
Wow.
Then you even look at the ingredients list right on the back, and I think I don't have the bottle here, but it's in the lab, right? It's like a long list of other stuff, right, that was added. But so I think there's a way to go, because there is something about the alcohol, right? And there's a reason why we like drinking alcohol, right? It gives us it does something in our body. Right? I was just recently actually reading an article where people try to simulate that feeling, right, without using alcohol, but the lightness, right, in your brain and everything, right, and because it makes us easier in a social environment, right? Nobody really, I don't know, unless you're an alcoholic, nobody really likes to drink by himself, right? But Stuart probably have mentioned this, right? But we have customers, and of course they're not in the US because they couldn't call it whiskey, right? If it is below 40%, right? But there is, especially in Asia, there's a huge interest in lower alcohol, whiskey tasting spirits, where people they don't want the 40, the 45, the 50% of alcohol, right? They want it to be in the range of 20, say, or 25 or something like this. And that's the beauty of our process again, right? Because it's really, really hard to do that with the traditional process, right? Because what are you really going to do, right? You can only take something that was already 5 years in the barrel or 10 and then try to do something with it, dilute it down and try to, I don't know, and you might start adding other things which we don't, but with our process, right, we can just play around and try things and do so many different things to figure out how to give it the structure and the complexity that people are expecting. But yeah, sometimes tell people if they want something that is really, really smooth, they should be drinking water. Don't drink whiskey.
Stu, do you have anything to add to that answer?
No, I don't think I could top what that. But I do think that he was spot on at the beginning, that it's a package deal. Right, it's the taste and the effect of alcohol that combined is why people drink it. And there's always going to be people that want that. There will be markets for people that don't, just like there's a market for decaf coffee, as an example.
Crazy people. Crazy.
And I think science will figure it out at some point.
Yeah.
But we're big fans of, I think, the value of the package. Call us traditionalists.
And being traditional.
Perfect.
Oh, well said. Well said,
Perfect
Stu.
timing.
Yeah, Joshua, I'll let you take us out of here.
That's brilliant.
That was excellent.
Stu, Martin, this has been a fantastic conversation. We always like to end with the question of what has you excited for the next year? What has you excited for the next 5 years? And I guess what I'd ask you is, what has you excited for the next 7 days, 14 days? In all seriousness, what has you excited moving forward for this category that you're, like Jason had said, you're really blazing a trail? What's keeping you going here?
I think from my perspective, it's actually been amazing to me just to look back at the last year. We only launched the company to the public, I think it was October of 2020. So we've been in the public's eyes a little bit over a year now. And when we first launched, there was, I'd say, equal amounts of enthusiasm, wow, this is cool, and skepticism. It's never worked before, lumping us into the accelerated aging category. I don't like this kind of product. And in the last 12 months, to see how much support has come behind our approach, how many of the pundits and the skeptics have been converted, and how many of the uninitiated, again, those underserved markets, those curious, those people who were intimidated, we've opened up the market to. And to see that kind of change and pivot in such a short time gives me so much hope and so much enthusiasm and so much excitement that we can really change the game and change the industry for the better. We're not trying to tear it down. We're trying to expand it. And then again, when you layer the sustainability element on top of it and make it good for the planet at the same time, that's a win-win-win. So that's really what I think I'm most excited about the next year. So look back at how far it's come in 1 year and see how far it can go in the next.
I love that. And Martin?
Nice.
Yeah, goes the same direction with what really motivates me is whenever I have a chance, just like right now, talking with you guys and hearing that people who clearly know about spirits much more than I do, because I haven't been in this industry that long, and I'm really also drinking a lot of our stuff. And even though whenever I go out, I try to drink different things, to see the feedback that we're getting and the excitement and how people say, "Oh man, this is so good!" And then you tell them the story, and they say, "I don't care that this was done in a couple of days. This is so good, right?" And then we have people who said, "Oh man, I never liked whiskeys, but this is so different. This is so good." And then they tell me, with some people from Korea, we're actually also selling in Korea, because they said, "Oh my God, my parents are here, and they don't like whiskeys, but they love your stuff, right? How can they get it in Korea?" So it just amazes me and makes of course myself personally, and I'm sure everybody else on the team too, just like super proud that there are people out there who kind of give us credit for all the work. Like Stu said, there's so much work going in. I always say we start working when everybody else stops working, because they put it in a barrel and then they leave it there and forget it for 20 years. And so that's what motivates me, and to see the excitement and hearing stories like from Joshua, that he went to the World of Whiskeys event, right, and he tasted our whiskeys and he thought they were good. Just makes me super happy, and that motivates all of us, I think, the most.
I think you used a better word than good, but
I didn't want to be.
Listen, I'll leave it with this. I'll leave it with this comment. And Stu, you had said something just a minute ago that made me think of this, but we've got a colleague named Chris Udy, who's part of Impex Beverages, importing company that I work with. And a few years back, he introduced 2 new Japanese whiskey brands to the U.S. market, Oishi and Fukano. And the amount of initial pushback that he got to those brands was phenomenal, because it was whiskey made from rice and a fermentation that used koji, not just the grain, the yeast, the water, but also koji. And people would say, "Well, that ain't whiskey." Well, technically speaking, and how the laws go, yes, it is 100% whiskey. And as people let their guards down, they discovered, oh, wait a second, this tastes really good. you let your guards down, and all of a sudden something magical could happen. And Chris's point was, all we're doing with this product is expanding whiskey. We're expanding the whiskey pie, and we're expanding the flavors that can come from whiskey. Why is that a bad thing? It's not. And that's what I say about this. Just like you had said, Stu, you're expanding whiskey, and we're tasting spirits that are pretty damn good and quite enjoyable. And when I came to that blind, and this is the beauty about tasting things blindly, all of your prejudices that you would come to a spirit with are not there for you to fall back on. You're just tasting the product for what it is. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed what I'm tasting today, and I enjoyed the conversation as well. So thank you both again. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, chaps. And agreed with what Joshua just said.
By the way, if anybody wants to check out our spirits or find out where they can get them, bespokenspirits.com has all the information on there, and our Instagram is at bespokenspirits as well.
Beautiful. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
I know I said it going in, and I know that our listeners heard it during the interview, but I'd like to give you a moment on this as well, because I know you've quoted me on this in at least one of our other interviews that we've done since we recorded this. But that idea that's so compelling to me about consumers, and I think so deeply and so fondly of our single cask nation fans, ambassadors, consumers, for want of a much warmer word.
Yeah, right.
And I think of us, and I think of myself as a consumer, and you as a consumer, and how we engage with the industry on that level. It is easy for me to forget about the much wider world, right? Even though I've said it many times, I came from a family that was rut gut blend drinkers, right? And I know what they were buying. For you hearing Stu's comment there about there are so many consumers and we're not able to sell to all consumers at all times, knowing what you do with Impex, knowing what you do with the sales team at Impex, what's your view of that statement, and how often are you thinking about that there are more consumers than we can possibly sell to?
I think about that often because, if I'm looking at the Impex portfolio specifically, it's loaded with small independent distilleries that even if the whiskey consuming community were a monolith, they could never produce enough liquid to satisfy the market. That's why Johnny Walker is a X million, case per year brand, and they have 27 to 30 some odd distilleries going into, different iterations of their blends. Again, stepping back and just looking, if we always do this, right? We lean on Scotch whiskeys as the signpost here. Mm-hmm. They're producing so much liquid, yet 85 to 88 or so % of that remains your blends, your Johnny Walkers, your Buchanans, your Chivas, your Ballantines, etc. I would argue that if there ever were a monolith, the monolith would be your blend drinker. The monolith would be your Jack and Coke people. The monolith would be your old-fashioned drinker, cheap bourbon on the rocks, right? That's your monolith. We're just so deep into it, and our listeners are so deep into it, that the world looking outward from within looks as if everybody's in the know and understands the nitty-gritty, and everybody wants to drink Kilchoman, and everybody understands Four Roses small batch limited edition. Like, no, that's not the case here. And so with that said, as you know, whether it's me with my Impex hat on or us with our Single Cask Nation hat on, it's very clear to us that we're always talking to a group of people who are a niche within a niche within a niche. And then specifically with the Single Cask Nation side, we are then even further a niche within that niche that is potentially within a niche. And so would I love everybody to know about Single Cask Nation? I would love that. Would I want everyone to drink Single Cask Nation? We simply couldn't do it. We simply could not do it, logistically speaking.
Well, and I was thinking about this person in our intro, and I didn't mention the name because I figured I'd get away with it once we came out of the interview. But having the opportunity to put the question in front of Martin and Stu about drinking whiskey if it didn't contain alcohol.
Yeah.
Which,
Yep.
as we're looking back and we're talking about Brian Davis in the second episode, of course we had Mark Watt in the third.
Fourth.
I get it wrong every time. Who was the third? Because I feel like I'm doing that person a real disservice.
Oh, my gosh.
Who was the third?
Oh, my gosh. I can't believe you can't remember who the third was as I go to the internet and check who the third is. So we had David Sturck, we had Brian Davis, we had
It's not Gordon MacPhail, is it? It's not an Urquhart.
No, it's not an
That
Urquhart.
wasn't in the third? Who's it?
No, it was.
Come on, without looking it up, who do you think it could have been? And if you've already seen it, don't play the game.
Oh, do you know what?
Okay, just...
Here is why we don't know who it was. Because it was a post-Whiskey Jubilee. It was like it was a Seattle event. So we had a number of people. We had Matt Hoffman. We had Jess Lomas. You know, when she had her previous employers, and we had Jeff Kanoff of Copperworks in there, and so there you go.
Oh man, I have to go back and listen to. I can't see. This is always the funny thing, right? I do this with TV shows, and I'll come back to my point in a second. But I do this with TV shows. You ever done this, where you've watched a TV show and you've generally remembered the arc? And then you go back and you rewatch the show and you say, that happened in the first episode?
Yes,
I thought that was the third episode.
Yep.
That happened in the second? I thought that was in the second season. And it was in the second episode? I remember doing it with Frasier, actually, is going back and rewatching all of Frasier and just having so many moments like, really? They're already at that stage in the arc? Wow. But you're saying that happens to you too? That makes me feel bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, Jason, we're men of a certain age, and these things happen. And on top of that, I mean, seeing as we're in this tangent here, there's just so much. Speaking of being consumers, there's so much media to consume. And I would argue that I'm watching far more television than I ever have, and trying to catch up on things, especially now being on the treadmill and catching up on shows there, and then you return to things. You're like, oh, geez, I don't remember that. So yes, so you're not alone,
That's
Jason.
good.
You're not alone.
Well, that makes me happy. And to be honest with you, I talk about having an old man brain plenty of times. I don't even think this is victim of old man brain. This is just how you watch a show and how you remember a show. I really want to go back and rewatch Russian Doll on Netflix. Yep. That was
You have to.
fantastic.
Season 2's coming soon, Jason.
See
Oh, I know. Yeah, you dislike.
Date.
Oh, I thought you were going to say. I don't need a second season of that, because you do that all the time. You're like, give me my one, maybe 2 seasons.
I would like a second.
Okay.
I don't need a third. Yeah.
Okay.
So getting to ask the Mark Watt question from episode 4 of season 1 about would you drink whiskey? I think about that question all the time. And the thing that scares me the most about that question is I don't know if I would. On one hand, I'm not drinking whiskey for the alcohol. I'm not drinking it to get drunk, certainly. drinking it for the flavor of it. And if you could make it taste the same without the alcohol, that's a fascinating question.
Well,
absolutely fascinating.
Because being drunk is your end point, right? And there's so many degrees between not having a sip of something and being drunk, right? I think if we can go through a series of quarter-ounce pours over the course of a conversation and having water, you may start just feeling a bit more open, and your mind is open a little more. And that's a great place to be in, I think, for the vast majority of people. Obviously, I understand there are people that have problems, and that's another thing. We're not going to go down there. But then there's that. And depending on how long you've been drinking, you can live in that, or how long you've been, dabbling in whiskey, you can live in that area for a period of time. And then you start getting into the areas of being tipsy and being buzzed and being a bit numbed. And that's your pivot point. But if you're smart about it and you continue drinking water and you're still having friends and maybe you have a low ABV pint in between, you can you can make it last a bit longer. Because for me, when it comes to dabbling in whiskeys and looking to explore flavors, I don't even particularly love getting into being tipsy. I like just being open, and that's where I like to live. And I think if you remove the alcohol, then you remove that potential to be open, and you can remain analytical about it, but you're depriving yourself of the emotion. I think that little bit of alcohol opens the door to emotion.
Could you do me a solid?
Well,
yes is the answer.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Can you thank Martin and Stu as you tend to do, and then could you wake up the paperboy for me?
Martin, Stu, it was really a pleasure talking with you both and learning about your processes. And like I said before the interview, like I said during the interview, and like I said when I was with Elijah back in September of 2021, tasting your spirits for the first time, it's clear you're making some really quaffable stuff. And I'm looking forward to watching you mature as see what I did there, as a business, and starting to understand more your consumers' own profiles and your clients' own profiles. I think what you're doing is very cool, is very interesting. I think people need to be open to it, and I think it will live very comfortably alongside traditional practices. So thank you again.
There you go. Best of luck, chaps. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Learned a ton along the way.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble again. Extra!
Thanks ever so much for giving him a little poke with a stick. Very gently, very respectfully. There's no newspaper boy abuse happening as any part of this podcast.
I don't know. There was one time where he said extra, and it was more like extra. Like he really, I may have hit him too hard with the stick.
A little pitchy. So the reason I've called you here today is we launched and sold out and shipped our second annual Thornton Distilling Co. Kosher for Passover American Rum. Mm-hmm. Single cask this year.
Yes.
Double cask last year. We'll see what the future holds for next year. But just wonderful support, as always, from the nation. In the US, it was a US release on that one, but tremendous support for that. Even nation members taking a step back, allowing those who observe kosher for Passover dietary regulations. If somebody wasn't in the same boat, they stood back, they let the sale happen. And then you'd said this many times, leave it 30 minutes, leave it an hour. It took 2 days, two full days.
2 days. And
for it to sell out.
We say this all the time. We've created such a wonderful community of people within Single Cask Nation, such a respectful group of people where we say, hey, guys, gals, could you help us here? Could you help out your fellow nation member here? And they say, you know what? We'll do just that. And normally, if we put out a rum and we said, have at it, nation members would have at it and it would be gone. And we said, you know what, just pump the brakes a bit. And they did. And we sold out. Yes, it took a couple of days. But, you know, when you look at the list of people, you know, it's obvious there are some Jewish names in there. So it's nice to see that those within our community that do follow those regulations, like you and I do, that they will have a nice little Passover. So thanks again to the nation members who kind of held off to let those that need something like this for their 8 days of Passover the ability to have that. Yeah, it was really wonderful.
Yeah, another brilliant one. I actually had a friend text me and say, sales are a bit slow on the Thornton. And I wrote the friend back and I said, the sales could not have been more perfect. When a bottle is available for 48 hours, I feel very confident that those who wanted a shot at purchasing it had a shot at purchasing it. And isn't it remarkable that we're living amongst a nation that thinks a 2-day sellout of an entire cask is slow going? Sure, it wasn't 2 minutes. Sure, it wasn't 2 hours. 2 days, I'll live with that all the time. All the time. I am totally down with that one. So that's the Thornton behind us. Brilliant achievement. Thanks to the nation.
Thanks to everyone. Yep.
Our incoming heritage rye from Yakandanda's very own backwoods distilling is almost to these shores, and very, very excited for the launch of that.
Yeah, it's right. Not our first rye, but our first rye whiskey from Australia, our first whiskey from Australia. And we've had Lee Atwood and his wife Bree on the podcast twice. Well, actually, Lee's been on twice, and Bree joined him the second time around. So really go back. If you haven't listened to those episodes yet, what they're doing down at Backwoods Distilling Company is phenomenal. And they're winning all sorts of awards between the rye, between their malt whiskey, their unusual red gum tree casks. They're doing some fine stuff, and they're good people. I think quite often when we talk with Sam and we ask him, what was your interest in bringing this distillery on and that distillery on, and he always goes back to, these are good people. They're good people who share a vision, and I would argue that Lee and Bree share a vision with us. They're just good people. So we're really happy to be partnering with them. And on the bottle, it has the Spirit of Collaboration logo that we've been using for many a year now, and we're proud to put that on our label with this collaboration here. And
we will have a tasting video. Go onto YouTube for that one, saying a bit more about this heritage rye. This is a US nation purchase only. And to circle back, and this is always your role when I'm talking, I'm very excited to play the role of Joshua here. When you mentioned Sam a moment ago, that would be Sam Filmus, president of Impex.
Correct. Yep.
importation into the United States. So, and obviously we talk about Sam all the bloody time, but Sam film us. So that's the Backwoods Heritage Rye that...
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait.
Also going to release a very small allotment. We've been doing some club collaborations and putting together some club picks. And we actually have a couple of blends. I feel that we've been talking about blends as today has gone along. And you mentioned the monolithic following that blends experience. And here we are with a couple of single cask blends. They will be small numbers. They have been splits with clubs. And absolutely delicious. With good ages on them as well. 14-year-old single cask and a 20-year-old single cask.
Yes, and one of them, you'll have to refresh my memory, one of them is a blended malt, and one of them is a blended whiskey, both of them being delicious.
The 20-year-old, if memory serves, is the blended malt.
Yes, I think you are correct there. And yeah, those were exciting casks to purchase. We got those, what, in 2018, 2019?
A fair while ago, yeah. A fair while.
So those will be really great to share with Nation members. And like you had said, we worked with these two clubs, and they picked up what their club needed. We always knew we would have some left over to share with Nation members, similar to a Foursquare we did some time back, where we had some bottles left over and we sold to our Nation members. So we're going to do that again. And these are just crackers, just absolutely wonderful single cask blends.
And just like I said about the Backwoods, we'll pop up a tasting video. We'll get that on YouTube for the Nation members. Those remaining bottles will be going to US online members as well. Don't think we've forgotten about you in ROW. ROW number 3 is still getting out to markets. Jess says this every week when we talk to her. We're working on getting ROW 3 out to Germany. It's on the water, heading to Japan. And there should be something coming together with our friends in Canada very soon as well. And we'll have updates there also. ROW4 has been selected, working on some things behind the scenes there. Jess is beside herself with excitement. And then the question that we're getting right now is retail release number 9 in the United States. And we are working on it. Global logistics being what they are, it's not how we might want it to be right now, but it certainly has our attention. It certainly has not been forgotten. And you have your friend Elijah fighting your corner, dear listeners, for that. So there we go. And we're certainly seeing a groundswell in Australia and New Zealand for taking our product down there as well. That's a 2022 project we're working on. Doesn't necessarily mean it will appear in 2022, but it is something we are breaking ground on for our friends down there.
I'm so glad you went with project rather than problem. Right, that could have gone two ways there. So
there you go. So that's a very quick roundup. I know we didn't have news in the first episode, and so we wanted to make sure we covered a bit of ground in the second episode.
Indeed, and now, Jason, I think we have an email we've been meaning to get to. In the last episode of season 5, we had our mailbag episode, and we'd mentioned the name Kevin Dunlop before, a Chicago guy who'd sent along 2 questions, or maybe more than 2, but there was definitely...
It was more than 2.
It was more than 2, but there was one bit that we said, you know what, we're going to bring this up in a season 6 episode. So you've got the question in front of you?
I have indeed. Just to refresh listeners' minds, in the mailbag episode, Kevin had asked about turning the kind of the amateur love affair into some kind of professional gig, and we'd given.
And he had moved in from Scotland. He had a similar background to you. Yes. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was Kevin. And so we'd covered that one, which he hadn't actually sent in for the mailbag, but it was such a good question, one that we hear a lot.
Yeah.
It was well worth covering.
Yep.
He'd sent in 2 for the mailbag, and the one that we answered was about dream picks. One from Scotland, one from the US, and one from ROW, which was just so beautifully framed as a question that we couldn't resist. But he had one, and I think it fits perfectly with the ground we covered in today's interview. And so Kevin Dunlop asks, do you think whiskey has a green issue? We are seeing distilleries talk about carbon neutral, etc. But in your recent episode with the rum distillery in Australia, that's perfect timing as well, they talked about barrels from Kentucky transporting barrels 1,200 miles, etc. I know that was a rum episode, but whiskey distilleries do the same thing. How do you see the industry changing to be more eco-friendly?
Well, I can think of a few examples of at least Scottish distilleries talking about green initiatives, right? Where they're recycling some of their heating water for other purposes. And then you've got distilleries like Ardnamurchan where they're using, recycled material for their cartons and things like that. And they really are. I mean, when it comes to green distilleries, I think Ardnamurchan endeavors to be the most green distillery in all of Scotland and may have already achieved that. But that's a good question.
I think Nick Nean would give them a good run for their money.
Nick Nean might, yeah. They may have to...
Nick Nean also comes to mind when you're talking about packaging, where they've spearheaded a campaign where if you've already purchased a bottle that came with packaging and you'd like another bottle from them, you can order it without the external packaging.
But I guess the question is, what would be the number one thing that a distillery or the parent company of distilleries would have to fight against or fix to become more green? I really liked his example of, bourbon barrels being shipped, thousands of miles to get to its destination.
Definitely a part of it.
Right?
Definitely a part of it.
That's a part of it. Now, I know cooperages like Speyside Cooperage and some of the others will purchase bourbon barrels, have them broken down, and then shipped over, and then they're recoopered into, in Scotland. And so I think you're minimizing the amount of space used, the amount of fuel used, and so on.
But at the same time as the industry's kind of moving away from that practice, no less an industry titan than Jim McEwen said, once barrels started getting shipped ready built as they had stood in America, better casks came in. The jigsaw puzzle rebuild was, to his mind, to the detriment of casks. And so, the line was always, why would you ship fresh air to Scotland in a ready-built barrel? Why not flat pack it, not ship the air? Now the response has been, but if you ship it whole, you get a better barrel, which is better for whiskey.
Well,
the part of the...
let me just say something really quickly here. Part of that is done out of necessity, because here in the U.S. we can only use that bourbon barrel once, and there is a waste component to that. In my mind, is a question. If you're chopping down trees to build a barrel, and you build the barrel, you do the new char, you create bourbon from it. If you don't use that elsewhere, then is that potentially more wasteful than, right? So there's that. And then you can sort of hyper-focus on other whiskey-producing countries, back to our friends down there in Australia and New Zealand, where they're using a large proportion of wine casks because Australia has such a big wine industry. And I know there are some people like, oh, Australian whiskey with their wine casks. Well, that's the casks that are available to them. Like, maybe give them a little, a nod of the hat, or the tip of the hat, for trying to create something that's a bit more hyper-focused on what an Australian product could or should look like, while staying a bit greener. I kind of like that. So, sorry, I just wanted to get that in there, that if we used a whiskey or a bourbon barrel once, that's potentially less green than shipping it across the world to then be used for a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and so on.
Well, I think when it comes to any of this, it's all a series of trade-offs.
Yeah.
So even from the very beginning, should we be cutting down trees that are able to absorb carbon dioxide from our atmosphere, right? We're probably already off to a bad start.
Yeah.
So then, to your point, well, if you have cut it down and you have made a barrel from it, how much life can you get out of that barrel? Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're shipping it overseas rather than keeping it in the United States, you've got a different proposition in front of you. The environmental question for me within our industry really comes back to the raw components, which is the trees that are growing, the water that's running, the barley that's being grown.
Sure.
And I think one of the big questions is, how is the barley being grown? And are we using, more modern agricultural practices? Are using an abundance of synthetic fertilizers that are causing runoff, that are then increasing nitrogen levels in streams and rivers that are making their way towards drinking water. Mm-hmm. You've then got the monocropping of a commodity, rather than, diversified farming. And again, we're back to, but there's such demand for that barley. Why wouldn't you turn your fields over to that and try and fill that niche as a farmer? And so I think that's problematic there as well. And then you've got the energy use, and you alluded to this earlier in this answer, is the energy use within any distillery, and how are they trying to cut down on that energy use? Even the where are you warming water? How are you warming water? Can you warm water in your process and then double that back into your process? Mm-hmm. We've got biomass, is it generators at places like Bunnahabhain and Bruichladdich on Islay.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so we're seeing that. You go visit George Grant at Glenfarclas, they'll talk about the water treatment plant that they've got behind the distillery. So they're not just putting their wastewater back into streams around the distillery. Another one of the raw ingredients is obviously peat and the slow regeneration of peat. And I know that there's a question about how is peat being used within the industry now. And I know there are certain distilleries that are re-examining how they use the peat. They're going to keep using it, but can they use it in a way that is less disruptive? And so these questions are definitely being asked, and we certainly don't have all the answers as we're sitting here now. But I think the fact that those questions are being asked of distilleries, and we're trying to get away from just being pawned off with the easiest answer, it gets me thinking corks, right? The neck capsules that get torn off and go straight into the trash, the bottles and how we're recycling those. I think every part of the process has questions that can be asked. And if we start from a position of, well, any industry is detrimental to the environment, we follow up with, well, how do we make it as little intrusion as possible? And perhaps that becomes the goal.
Yeah, I wish I wish we did have the answers, but it's clear the question was asked, right? So so it's obvious that no one has the exact answer. However, there are distilleries that are trying to make headway and are trying to be visible for making headway. And my hope is that, these are all single malt producers or large bourbon producers or what have you that are saying, hey, this is what we're doing. Again, back to the signpost of Scotch whiskey, my hope is that all of those distilleries that no one knows about, where they're just making liquid to go into a blend, hopefully they're following suit with what those single malt brands are doing moving forward.
Well, and gosh, if we're talking about industry on one hand, we're talking about consumers on the other, and I think when one engages with a brand, it's asking the follow-up question. And I know for us, when we go to distilleries and they talk about, and the leftover mash is draff, and that goes to the farmer and makes for happy cows. Like, that's pitched as look at this complete cycle here. It's become a red herring. There are environmental questions to be asking separate from the draft going to local farmers.
100%. Yeah, it's a nice way of saying, hey, look what we've done. Let's move on and show you another process. And please don't ask us more questions. Yeah.
You want to have some fun before we get out of here?
No. Oh, wait.
Okay, cheerio, everybody. Thanks very much. Reach out to us. Questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com. No Ian Whiskey.
Jason, I always want to have fun with you. Girls and guys just want to have fun.
So we talked in episode 1 about the kind of the post-interview portion of our podcast, doing some slightly different things. And I've had this little game in mind for a while that I'm going to try out with you today and see if it becomes something we either continue or even start to do with the occasional future guest.
Okay, all right.
So I have
hide the sausage?
Reached... That's only when we're back to doing in-person interviews. That doesn't work on Zoom. So I've pulled the 1989 first edition Malt Whiskey Companion by Michael Jackson.
Oh my gosh.
Off my shelf.
Project 1989, huh? There you go.
Can you imagine Jess and Sweet Scott were being born at the same time as Michael Jackson's Malt Whiskey Companion?
Oh my gosh, amazing. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, it just reminded me how old we are. Anyway, yeah.
And I was 7 years away from beginning my whiskey journey, and so the thought that I could pick up this 7-year-old book and it's Michael Jackson's 1989 companion. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you his overview of the distillery. Mm-hmm. And in this edition, he has one tasting note for this distillery.
One tasting.
And I would like you to guess the distillery.
Okay. Should I have a little pen and paper here to?
No, your mind's like a steel trap. Just listen and think.
Gosh. All right. You have a lot of faith in me. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I also have to read the paragraph without saying the distillery if he says it in the paragraph. I'm also not going to read details that would give away too much.
Okay. All right. This is going to be fun. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So Michael Jackson writes, "A lovely old-fashioned Highland malt that can be found only in independent bottlings. Mm-hmm. Perfect for bedtime." He then goes on to describe where it is and I'm not going to say that. He then says, this distillery, he uses the name, this distillery was founded in 1897 and extended in 1965. It has been temporarily closed since 1985. He then says this thing that I really didn't know, even with the distillery name in it. This distillery has no connection with a variety of liqueurs and blended whiskies called blank and produced in various parts of the world. Its malt whiskey has been a component of the Johnnie Walker blends. The one and only tasting note is for a 1970 Gordon and MacPhail Connoisseur's Choice release at 40% alcohol.
Okay.
And he writes, colour, full, gold. There is a comma between full and gold.
Interesting.
Nose, sherry-ish, aromatic, smoky. Body, medium to full, soft, rich. Lovely to see Michael Jackson using rich.
There you go.
A quality that ended up in a flavometer. Palate, malty, with notes of barley and vanilla, smoky and full of flavour. A powerful, interesting combination of malty sweetness and peaty smokiness. Finish, soft, smoky. Score, out of 100, 76.
It's so interesting with Michael Jackson's scoring. He doesn't score high numbers, but he always has nice things to say. I've always liked that about him. So, all right. So here's a thing. When he mentioned a Highland distillery that's used in Johnnie Walker blends, and so my mind went in one place, and then when he called it out as smoky, my mind changed a little bit. The fact that the distillery was opened in 1897 is unfortunately not very helpful because
that hasn't given it away.
Yeah. There's a good number of distilleries like our dear friend Ian Allen with Glen Murray. Smoky, rich, closed in 1985.
And here he is writing 4 years later.
Yeah.
That it was temporarily closed.
And it's in Johnnie Walker. So a smoky Highland whiskey that can only be found in independent bottlings, at least in 1989, that is a Johnnie Walker component. Gosh. Is there anything else? Is this like, so let me ask you this. If I were to read that to you, is it clearly missing things, or do you feel there's enough hints in there that you would have gotten it correct?
I don't think I would have got this correct. I think this has enough head fakes as we use in the world of basketball. So let me tell you this. Okay. There is the geographical sentence that gives away a lot.
But then what if I get it wrong? Now I'm afraid.
You won't.
Okay.
You won't.
Okay.
So I'm not going to give you that just yet. What I'm going to say is this is not a distillery that we think of as a Diageo distillery.
Okay.
I will also go on to say not only was it temporarily closed in 1985, it ended up reopening for a short period before being reclosed and ultimately demolished.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Oh, I thought for sure you were like, oh, then it's this distillery.
No,
okay. I thought I was
really
helping you with that information.
And then demolished. Huh. Well, I think it does start to narrow things down a bit. Okay, I'm
if I give you the sentence that I haven't read to you, you are going to slam dunk the naming of this distillery.
Okay, I'm just going to
continue
I'm going to take a sip of a
basketball
tiny
entry.
sample that I have here to see.
Your sample isn't a 1970 distillate bottled by Gordon MacPhail in the Connoisseur's Choice range, are you?
No, it is a 1978 bottling of a 26-year-old by Hart Brothers of this distillery, and I don't think it's them.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, you should tell the listeners what you're tasting.
Last time I was in Chicago, I received a sample of a 26-year-old from the Glen Albin distillery from Nick Reimer. Nick, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name. And
you're pronouncing that with neither rhyme nor reason.
Oh, I like that. And so my thought was, maybe it's a Glen Albin, but yeah, it's not. I just tasted it, and a tiny sip from the bottle. I told him I was going to wait for the right moment to be opening this, and that moment's coming soon. So I just took a tiny little pull from the bottle.
Well, let me add this in while you're having a little think here. Is there are aspects of this tasting note that I wouldn't think for this distillery. There are pretty discernible qualities from this distillery that are missing from this tasting note. And one of the things that I want to achieve with this kind of fun little game is going into 1989 and having Michael Jackson clearly talk about 1970 distillate the way you and I sitting in 2022 would be talking about 2003 distillate.
Yeah.
And as we look back, 2003 doesn't feel that long ago. And for Michael Jackson writing in 1989, 1970 wasn't that long ago.
No.
But I want to see, what was a distillery style like then? What was a known tasting note like then? And I think this example does a good job of showing we don't really talk about this distillery now the way Michael Jackson talked about it in 1989.
Does Diageo not own the distillery anymore because it was demolished? Like, do they still? Okay.
No.
Yeah.
No, it was owned by somebody else.
It was owned by somebody else.
Yeah, they sold it. I just off the top of my head don't know the year it was sold. And I would reach for the Ingvar Ron Malt Whiskey Yearbook to get the answer to that question. Do you want me to give you this geographical sentence?
Yeah, give me the geographical sentence, see if that helps me.
The distillery is in the heart of Speyside at Carron, just across the river from Dalhousie, with which it has historically been linked.
I feel so stupid right now. Like, is it?
You know this answer, Joshua Hatton.
And so that's the thing. Like, I know the answer, but at least I think I know the answer, but the smoky note is throwing
Ignore
me.
the smoky note.
Then it's
Ignore
Imperial.
the smoky note. It's Imperial.
It's Imperial, right? So if he didn't include smoky, I think I would have gotten that much earlier on because everything else made sense. But when he said smoky, that totally threw me off.
That's why I wanted to start here.
Because
isn't it so telling that you collect Imperial?
Yeah.
How many of those old Imperials that you've acquired and opened and tasted do you think, oh, smoky Imperial?
I don't need a hand to count the number because there isn't one. There's not a single one where there's smokiness. It makes me wonder if it was a connoisseur's choice, if there was something else going on there. Maybe that Imperial was in like a peated cask beforehand or something. But boy, did that throw me off. Holy crap.
Yeah, even when he talks about the nose, sherry-ish. And I think
yes,
Right? And I think this is so telling that we've talked about, since creating Single Cask Nation, we wanted transparency. We ourselves, as consumers, felt like we needed more than, oh, it was matured in oak. Well, yes, as we've said, no shit, Sherlock. It was matured in oak, an SWA regulation. Here you've got no cask information at all.
Yeah.
Right? We don't know if this was a second fill sherry hoggy that just put a little bit of sherry onto the nose for Michael here. We don't know if this was a sherried Isla cask that they had floating around the warehouse, that they only bottled one of these ever, and it was the 1970 Connoisseur's Choice that Michael Jackson ended up tasting. I do wish there had been another note there. I would like to have gone past just the one note, for a tasting note. But this has done exactly what I wanted it to do, which is, again, and it fits with what we've talked about through today's episode, the evolution of an industry. The way there is a lot more sharing now about the cask type, about the spirit, right? The strengths have increased. Talking about Imperial as smoky has really gone the way of the dodo. Even though this was an N of 1 for Michael Jackson, it's not scientific in any way, shape, or form. But the distillery wasn't owned by Diageo when it was finally shuttered, when it was finally demolished. It was a Pernod Ricard distillery, Chivas Brothers. And so, like, I love being able to show that the whiskey industry wasn't born from whole cloth in 2005.
No.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right? It went through, like you had said, evolution and change and some of that just being the changing of hands and where that liquid is destined to go. Wow. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this smoky note. Like, every other part adds up to Imperial.
Right? Well, and that was why I wanted to see if you would allow the smoky to cloud your vision, or whether you would plow through it, or even if there would be context for this being a 1970 version.
So think about what smoky did in the context of a Highland distillery from a 1970 distillate. How few Highland distilleries were using peat. And so, for a second I went Brora, and I said, no, I know there's no way it could have been Brora. And then I said, well, maybe Ben Romach, because, they had a peaty one, and Gordon MacPhail now owns Ben Romach, and this was a Gordon MacPhail bottling that he talked about as tasting. I don't think that's it. And then it was demolished, so it's definitely not Ben Romach, and so, oh God, that was fun, Jason. That was fun.
Yeah, and I also think as we go through some more of these, with you, with guests, it'll be fun to build that context for that 1989.
Yeah.
To see, okay, what's he hitting out the ballpark, or not what is he hitting out the ballpark, but what has remained consistent from 89 to 2022, and then where are those moments that are, far and away different.
Indeed.
I'm excited. Cheers for playing along, listeners. I hope that worked for all of you. I wonder how many were screaming Imperial at their radio controls, and how many were also thrown by the smoky.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear people playing along at home where the track they were going down. So if you wanna send in a question like Kevin Dunlop did, if you wanted to chime in, we'd love to hear what your answers were along the way. And if anybody got Imperial off the bat, good job. Well done. I was not able to do it.
Tons of fun. Well, thank you, Joshua, and obviously Martin and Stu Kevin, as you just said a moment ago. Good episode. I enjoyed that.
Likewise. I will see you. Oh, I can't wait for our season 3 guest.
Season 3?
Yep.
Season 3?
So I can't wait for our episode 3 of season 6 guest.
Absolutely. We're going to follow on very nicely. Very nicely.
All right.
Well, cheers to you. Cheers to the world at large. Cheers to the roving nation.
Cheers, everybody. Oh, Jesus.
Well, that's good. That was so bad it gave me time to actually reach for stemware. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
One elephant, two elephant, three elephant, four elephant, five elephant. Glad I could look up and see there are 5 notches up there.
5 notches on your belt.
More than that, they're buenas notches.
Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under... That was really good, Jason. With One Nation Under Whisky.com. Let's try this again. Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whisky. Why can't I do this? I keep on wanting to say .com.
Strange.